Today's lesson is Tried and Tested Study Hacks. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today, of course, we're going to be talking about how to study effectively and efficiently. But we've got some special tricks that might help you out, ways to study that maybe you haven't used before, but they might actually be quite helpful. And they might help our dear students when trying to learn English with us.
And that would absolutely be wonderful. These hacks are kind of fun. When we talk about hacks, we're talking about little tricks that you might pick up by yourself if you're careful and wise, or you can just learn hacks from other people. So there's sort of like little shortcuts, little ways of getting to your goal or getting an advantage that aren't too hard and are a little bit clever, a little bit creative. So let's find out how we can study a little bit better, get a little bit better grades, and do it without too much difficulty, and use a little trick to use a little hack to do it. Tried and tested study hacks.
When you have a test coming up, you might find yourself wondering how on earth you're going to cram all the information into your head before it's too late. Don't worry, these 3 study hacks can help.
Okay, let's talk about the first part of our lesson for today. Again, we're talking about tried and tested study hacks. The word hack refers to special techniques that you use that aren't usually used. Sometimes you see these videos posted on Facebook or on other forms of social media, life hacks. Like these are ways you can, say, fix your phone or something, or to screw in a light bulb. There are different special techniques that you can use to make your life easier at home. But here we're talking about special techniques to help you with your studies to make your study time more effective. And these are tried and tested methods, which means other people have tried them and they have been tested and they have been shown to be effective.
It says, when you have a test coming up, you might find yourself wondering how on earth you're going to cram all the information into your head before it's too late. Well, yes, this is a situation almost anyone who's ever spent some time at school has faced. You haven't prepared for your test enough. It's the night before. You're starting to panic and thinking, how am I going to cram all this information into my head before it's too late? Of course, we all know, start preparing for your test much earlier than that. But being human, sometimes we don't. So we have to cram the information. When you cram something, you're trying to fit a lot of material into a small space. Imagine the person who's taking way too many clothes on a holiday and their suitcase is really small and they're standing on it, sitting on it, jumping up and down on the suitcase to try to get it to close because they're trying to cram all that stuff into a small bag. Well, we can use the same sort of term to talk about putting information into your head. In fact, we can use this to talk about studying at the last minute. If you say, I have to cram for my test tonight, I already understand that you're studying at the last minute, you have a lot to learn, and the test is probably tomorrow. That's why you're cramming instead of studying. So yes, cramming information into your head before it's too late is never a good test-taking strategy, but we're here to help, aren't we, Roger?
We certainly are, and you can ask this question, how am I going to cram all that information into my brain? And if you want to emphasize that question, how, you can say this phrase here, how on earth am I going to do that? Or you might be able to say, what in the world is that? That's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And here, of course, you're wondering how on earth you're going to cram all that information into your head before it's too late. And if you're not able to cram that information into your head by the test time, then my goodness, you're going to probably fail the exam and your parents are going to be angry at you and you might not have a second chance. But don't worry, these 3 study hacks can help. So these are some suggestions that have been tried and tested that might actually work for you. Let's talk about the first method in the next part of our lesson. We'll listen first.
The first method involves testing yourself on material you haven't yet tried to learn. If your first guess is wrong, your brain works harder to memorize the correct answer so that you don't make the same mistake twice. To take advantage of this hypercorrection effect, test yourself early and often. Rather than devoting a large chunk of time to studying a single topic, try interleaving, regularly switching between different subjects or areas. By doing so, you'll develop effective strategies for processing information. If you are using flashcards, try mixing them up so that you are learning a variety of material in any given study session. Those who are organized and prepared to study over a longer period of time can learn the material, give themselves enough time to almost forget it, and then learn it again. This method, called spacing, is excellent for long-term retention of information.
大家好，第二部分我们看到单字 memorize， 这个字是动词，指记住或是熟记。例如 We need to memorize only the first 10 lines of the poem. 我们只需要背这首诗的前10行。或是 Aaron must memorize a lot of information for science class. Aaron 在自然科学课上必须熟记很多资讯。另外补充这个字的形容词 memorable。memorable, memorable, 意思是难忘的或是值得纪念的。我们可以说 The author's latest book wasn't terrible, but it wasn't too memorable either. 这位作家的新作不糟，不过也不令人难忘。也可以说 The politician wrote his memoirs covering many of the memorable events in his life. 那名政治人物撰写自己的回忆录，涵盖他人生中许多难忘的事件。接着我们看到动词 devote， 指奉献、投入时间或精力等，或是将点点点专用于。例如 Ryan works during the day and devotes his evenings to studying. Ryan 白天上班，晚上则将时间投入在学习上。或是 This room is devoted to old family photographs. 这个房间专门用来放昔日的家庭照片。另外补充这个字的名词 devotion, D-E-V-O-T-I-O-N, devotion, 意思是热爱或是奉献。我们可以说 Nancy has a lot of devotion to her job and she often works late. Nancy 对工作奉献许多，她常常工作到很晚。也可以说 I've never met anyone with such a strong devotion to their family before. 我从没遇过对家庭如此奉献的人。再来我们看到单字 retention， 这个字是名词，指保留或是保持，像是 Retention of customers is less costly than obtaining new ones. 留住顾客跟吸引新顾客比起来花费较少。再举一个例子 Getting enough sleep can increase memory retention. 睡眠充足可以提升记忆力。另外补充这个字的动词 retain, R-E-T-A-I-N, retain, 意思是保持或是保留。例如 Steve retained his accent decades after leaving Australia. Steve 离开澳洲好几十年后仍保有口音。或是 After retiring from the company, Nelson retained a voting position on the board of directors. Nelson 从公司退休后仍在董事会里保有投票权。
Okay, so the first method, the first study hack that we're going to talk about involves testing yourself on material you haven't yet tried to learn. That's interesting. So I'm imagining some kind of article written, perhaps in our study magazine, and then we have some content questions at the end of the article. Well, don't read the article first. Actually go straight to the questions and try to answer the questions, even though you haven't actually read the article. That seems kind of weird, but in some strange way, it might actually work.
Very, very interesting because, of course, as you're doing this, it says if your first guess is wrong, your brain works harder to memorize the correct answer so that you don't make the same mistake twice. Interesting. So if you kind of fail at first, your brain will look for ways to not fail again, so your brain will work harder to memorize or remember the correct answer. If you're taking facts and information and you don't want to write them down, you don't want to have them nearby to look up when you need them, you want to have them in your brain so they're always there. You are going to memorize that. One of the things we sometimes have to do occasionally is memorize our new passwords or new PIN numbers when we get a new bank card or, subscribe to a new website. You have to memorize all these things. It's not safe to write down your PIN number and keep it on a piece of paper, so you try to memorize it or commit that to your memory. So if you make a mistake on this first sort of self-test, your brain will work harder to memorize the right or correct answer so that you don't make the same mistake twice. If you're being wise, if you're learning, if you're getting good experience in life, you will try not to make the same mistake twice. We all make mistakes, but if you learn from your mistakes, you won't do the same thing again, make the same mistake twice.
Right. So again, for example, I could say maybe someone's going to ask me how to say tadpole in Spanish. Gee, I don't know how to say tadpole in Spanish. That's a really weird word. Maybe I guess tadapola or something like that. And then I look up the actual answer and see that tadpole in Spanish is actually renacuajo. And then because I actually guessed incorrectly at the beginning, I'll be able better to remember the word in Spanish for tadpole, renacuajo. Okay, so that might actually be a technique you might use in memorizing English vocabulary or whatever. So again, you won't make the same mistake twice. And to take advantage of this hyper-correction effect, test yourself early and often. So it's a hyper-correction effect. You're wrong. Most people don't want to be wrong, but if you're being wrong on purpose in a really strange way, it actually makes you correct the next time more often. So indeed, test yourself early and test yourself often, and you'll be surprised. You'll be learning things more quickly that way if you can basically accept the fact that you're going to be wrong at your first guess.
There you go. That's one quick study hack. Now let's move on and read the next paragraph, which says, rather than devoting a large chunk of time to studying a single topic, try interleaving, regularly switching between different subjects or areas. Okay, this is an interesting one, I have to admit. I probably didn't do back in my school days. Normally, we would devote a large chunk of time to studying a single topic, right? You'd say, I have a math test tomorrow, so tonight I will study math. That might not be a good idea. Devoting a large chunk of time to studying a single topic might not be the wisest move, because if you're devoting something, you're kind of giving that to another thing or another object. You're sort of setting it aside, saying, okay, this is only for that purpose. If you're saving to buy a house, you might devote a certain percentage of your monthly salary to just putting in your housing fund or your holiday fund or your new car fund. When people get married, they might say, I'm devoting my life to you. I'm going to sort of give my life to you, making you happy, being with you in a happy marriage is what I'm sort of, focusing my life on and dedicating a portion of my life or my time to. So to devote something is to sort of promise it to something or plan it to be used in a certain special way. In this case, we're devoting a large chunk of time. Well, you devote time to all sorts of things that are important to you, your family, your job, your hobbies. And if it's a big amount of time, we might use this word, a chunk. What is a chunk? It's just a large amount of something, probably a large amount taken away from an even larger amount. If you took a chunk of cake, that means, wow, that's probably enough for 3 pieces of cake. It's a large portion of cake. So devoting a large portion, we could also use that word of time to studying a single topic might not be the best idea. So the article suggests interleaving.
Basically, the definition of that word is to insert blank pieces of paper between other pages in your book, but in this usage here, it just means alternating between different topics. Don't focus on one big chunk of information. Don't spend one large chunk of time on one single topic. Mix things around, okay? So maybe you've been working on your calculus for a really long time and you're starting to doze off. Well, switch to another topic. Start reviewing your Japanese or go back and study chemistry or literature or whatever. Yeah, just kind of jump back and forth between different subjects because it will give your mind a break. And this, I think, can also apply to learning sports. If you spend all your time practicing your shooting, well, it's going to get boring after a while. So yeah, practice shooting for maybe 5 to 10 minutes and then practice your dribbling skills and then your running skills. Just kind of mix things up a bit.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. Mix things up. Of course, if you focus too much on doing one thing, it probably won't work as well than as if you interleave it or sort of mix it up, put it on random shuffle play, as we might say with a music program. By doing so, it says you'll develop effective strategies for processing information. It's a good way to kind of test your brain, keep your brain on its toes, as it were, because, of course, our brain will get bored eventually learning about the same topic, reading the same facts over and over again. Whereas if you kind of mix it up, go back to an hour later after studying something else, your brain will be a little bit more alert and probably paying attention. It says if you're using flashcards, try mixing them up so that you are learning a variety of material in any given study session. Another good way of interleaving things. These flashcards are often little note cards, and you might write a question on one side and the answer on the back, and you pull them out and you test yourself. Now, often you might do this by writing down the questions from Chapter 1 and then Chapter 2 and then Chapter 3 and going through it logically like that. But the article says try mixing them up. This is kind of like interleaving them. The way you would mix up a pack of cards. When you shuffle cards, you interleave the cards so that they come out in a random order. And in this way, you're learning a variety of material in any given study session. You could mix up the material, you could mix up the subjects, or just mix up the chapters in the book. So you ask yourself a question from Chapter 2 and then Chapter 7, then Chapter 1, that kind of idea. Or, if you really want a challenge, you'll have a math question, then a history question, then a French question, or something like that. It would definitely keep your brain on the alert.
This reminds me of studying Chinese. I use flashcards, or at least I used to. And yes, if you just keep looking at the Chinese characters one after another, you're going to start dozing off pretty soon. So I try to mix things up, look at the Chinese words and try to say them in English, and then reverse the role, look at the English words and think of how to say them in Chinese, or read the sentences which contain those words, because sometimes looking at just the words only can be quite boring. So yes, you need to mix things up. Have a variety of material in any given study session, or even, as we suggested, put away your Chinese study for a while and start reviewing your chemistry formulas and stuff like that. Now, here we've got another technique called spacing in the following paragraph. It says, those who are organized and prepared to study over a longer period of time can learn the material, give themselves enough time to almost forget it, and then learn it again. So again, this method is called spacing, and it's excellent for long-term retention of information. So if you're organized and you're prepared to study over a very long period of time, you can use this technique. You learn the material, and then you give yourself enough time to actually forget that material and then come back and learn it again. That's an interesting method, and of course, it's going to help you retain that information for a longer period of time. The verb to retain means to keep something, and the noun form is retention. So this method is excellent for long-term retention of information. You're just not going to easily forget it. You might actually remember it for the rest of your life. That brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Now let's wrap things up with the third and final part.
These study hacks may seem counterintuitive, but studies have shown that they actually work. Instead of panicking, give yourself time to deploy these techniques. You might be pleasantly surprised by the outcome.
最后第三部分，我们看到动词 deploy， 指有效运用、发挥点点点作用或是部署、调动。举例来说 ，Nigel deployed vans carrying advertisements for his business across Taipei. Nigel 在台北各地部署刊有他公司宣传广告的货车。也可以说 ，The police are deploying mobile speed cameras across the city to catch people who break the speed limit. 警方在市区各地部署了机动测速照相机，来抓超速的人。另外，将这个字字尾加上 ment， 就变成了名词 deployment， 指部署或是调动。我们可以说 General Driedel was in charge of the deployment of the new aircraft to Europe. Driedel 将军负责部署那架飞往欧洲的新飞机。或者 After their deployment had finished, the soldiers returned home. 在军队调动完成后，士兵们返回家中。
So again, we've been talking about various study hacks that you may have tried to use yourself before. And if you haven't, you might consider using them, and you might be surprised. They might actually help you ace your next exam. And here in the final paragraph, it says, these study hacks may seem counterintuitive, but studies have shown that they actually work. So remember, if something's counterintuitive, it seems like it's illogical. It just doesn't seem to fit the way things are normally done. You may look at these techniques and think, I've never tried that before. That just sounds so weird. I just think I'll stick to my older technique. So again, these just seem kind of unusual. They're counterintuitive.
Absolutely. It goes against all your logic and experience. As soon as you hear it, you think that can't be true. But in some cases, things that are counterintuitive, when you actually try them out, they might work. And here's another bit of advice, another reason to try one of these hacks. Instead of panicking, give yourself time to deploy these techniques. Yeah, because no one likes that feeling of cramming the night before the test. No one likes that feeling of being unprepared the morning of the test and feeling like, oh, I should have done all this a week ago. So instead of panicking, instead of being in that situation, putting yourself in that situation, give yourself time to deploy these techniques. When we use this word deploy in this sense, we're talking about using something, basically put it into effect, put it into action, something like that. We can use deploy also in a more sort of literal way, in the way you might deploy a rescue device. If you're on a boat and someone falls off the boat, you might deploy a life vest or a lifeboat or something like that. You're putting something into action, you're using something to achieve a goal or to reach a result. So give yourself time to use these techniques, put them into action, see if they actually work. And as we read in the last sentence there, you might be pleasantly surprised by the outcome. You might be pleasantly surprised by the results. In other words, you might get better marks than you expected, and it might be easier than you expected. So yeah, why not?
And we wish you the best of luck in using these techniques. We certainly want to hear that all our students are doing quite well in their subjects at school. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher, Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny， 今天要来练习克漏字的题型。我们来看文章的5个题目。第一题是 The first method 空格 Testing yourself on material you haven't yet tried to learn。 第一个方法空格用还没试着学习的素材来测验自己。那这个题目是在考我们字汇，来看选项 A Contemplate 它表示仔细考虑沉思， B Anticipate 表示预期预计， C Recalls 是回想起或是记起， D Involves 表示需要包含。那这个句子是在说明第一个方法的内容，说明第一个方法它可能需要做什么啊，包含了什么，所以比较适合的选项就是 D Involves包含需要。好，那来看第二题 If your first guess is wrong, your brain works harder to memorize the correct answer so that you don't 空格。如果你第一次猜测是错的，你的大脑会更努力记住正确答案，这样你就不会空格。这题是在考我们词组的语义。来看选项 A Make the same mistake twice 再犯同样的错误， B Test yourself again再测验自己一次， C Remember everything you've learned 记住所有你学过的东西， D Get distracted while studying读书时分心，其中这个 distracted 是形容词，形容注意力分散的、分心的，也可以形容是心烦意乱的、忧虑的等等。我们从语义上来判断呢，应该是要表达，如果你第一次猜错呢，大脑会更努力记住正确答案，这样就不会再犯同样的错咯。所以最适合答案要选 A Make the same mistake twice。来看第三题 Rather than devoting a large chunk of time to 空格 a single topic Try interleaving 与其花大量的时间空格单一主题，不如试着交错学习。那4个选项它分别是 A Be studied B study C studying D studied。 好，这题是考我们动词的用法，那解题的关键就在于空格前面的动词 devote 它表示投入奉献，那它的用法是 devote something to 加上名词或动名词。既然是名词或动名词，我们就只剩下 be study 或是 see studying 有可能是答案。而我们看到空格后面有 a single topic， 这应该是用来当动词 study 的受词。那 study 我们说要用动名词的形式哦，所以答案选 C studying。好，第4题他说 If you're using flashcards try 空格 so that you are learning a variety of material in any given study session. 如果你在使用字卡，试着空格，这样你就能在任何学习时段学到各式各样的素材。好，句子里面这个 flashcard 就是字卡、闪示卡，也就是上面它印有文字或图片的那种小卡，常常用来当做反复练习复习的工具。而我们这题是来考片语动词，来看选项 A mixing them up， 就是把它们混在一起。 B checking them out， 这个 check out 当及物用法的时候，它有那种核实、查看或是了解点点点情况的意思。C turning them down 拒绝他们，那么 turn down somebody or something 就是表达拒绝请求啊、拒绝提议等等。那么 D showing them off， 这个 show off 它可以表达炫耀、展示的意思。由于课文前面提到说要经常在不同科目或领域之间切换，那这边又提到说在任何学习时段学到各式各样素材，我们可以推测课文是要建议我们把字卡混在一起。好，所以比较适合答案就是 A mixing them up。 好，再来看第5题，他说空格 panicking，Give yourself time to deploy these techniques。 他是说空格惊慌，给自己时间来有效运用这些技巧。那这题是来考我们片语介系词，来看选项 A in spite of 表示尽管虽然。 B instead of 它可以表达是什么而不是什么，用什么来代替什么的那种意思。 C as a result of表示由于因为。 D regardless of 表示不管不顾。从语义上来看，它是要鼓励读者不要惊慌，而是要给自己时间来有效运用这些技巧，所以比较适合答案就是 B instead of。 他说 instead of panicking 就是说不要惊慌，而是要怎么样怎么样。好，那么以上是今天的讲解，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Hack. Use these productivity hacks to get more done in less time. Memorize. Actors must memorize all of their lines before filming begins. Devote. The newspaper devoted an entire page to covering the war. Chunk. Most people spend a large chunk of their income on rent. Deploy. The countries are currently discussing the best way to deploy aid. Outcome. It will be difficult to predict the outcome of this year's election.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.